Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 22nd of January 2024. Before we go to where we normally start, which is the aid section, the equipment section, we're going to just drop into what I was talking about in the previous video. Just something to add with regard to the strike on Donetsk, on the market in Donetsk, and some people claiming that Russians claiming this was the Ukrainians hitting Donetsk, Ukrainians claiming it's a false flag operation. Ewan McDonald here is just coming out with some more, justification that it was a Russian strike. So there is evidence that the attack on the market in Donetsk on the 21st was a Russian false flag. Time between the sounds of the rounds being fired and their impact indicates a maximum distance of a weapon from 4 kilometers away. So the front line is shown in red. The weapon was fired in Russian-held territory. So this is, some evidence. I mean, make of it what you will, but this is certainly suggesting that this couldn't have been a Ukrainian attack. I mean, there is a number of bits of analysis. This is a video that captures the sound of the outgoing rounds heading towards Donetsk and their impact. The first round hits 2.5 seconds after firing, and the second 4.25 seconds. If we accept Russia's new version, that this was 152 and 155 mil artillery, this is 4 kilometers out max. The muzzle velocity of the M777, it's, a little bit of analysis there, muzzle velocities and whatnot. There is one small problem with Ukraine attacked a Donetsk market in the Kurovsky district with mortars. It's impossible. The LOC is 15.2 kilometers away. So I think the original claim was it as mortars, and then they had to change it to say it wasn't mortars because, it's too far away. The Ukrainians are too far away for it to be mortars. So then it became artillery, but then the sound doesn't support artillery. So actually, it does look more like, if this is true, it does look more like a Russian shelling of the marketplace. He says the LOC is 15.2 kilometers away. No 120 mil mortar system in NATO infantry can reach 15,700 meters. The splash patterns don't match any barrel artillery rounds, so on and so forth. So there's some quite a bit of analysis there from Malcontent News to support the Ukrainian narrative. Okay, moving on to aid now. The EU is considering a new scheme for financing Ukraine. They seem to be coming up with these all the time to try and get around the issue of Orban's vetoing of EU aid. The plan aims on returning over 20 billion euros to member states for the military aid they will provide to Ukraine over the next 4 years. This might be in line with what Germany want, which is, if we are giving 7 billion euros, say Germany, to Ukraine, then we need that taken off what we are expected to pay into the EU. So it's this tension between the bilateral aid assistance from individual European countries and the EU derived aid that comes from the general pot that people contribute to. And I've talked about this previously with what Thierry Breton said as the French minister in charge of the Treasury for the EU and supporting the EU doing it centrally compared to what Germany wants, or at least what they appear to be doing now, which is giving an awful lot bilaterally and then asking not to have to contribute so much to the EU pot. It's great either way. I'm sure it's good. They just need the aid, no matter where it comes from and how it's delivered. Let's hope that all gets sorted out. Lithuania will additionally transfer armored vehicles, ammunition, and anti-drone systems to Ukraine, says the country's president Nauseda. Fabulous stuff from the Baltics again. In an interview with Major General Christian Freuding, head of the Planning Command Staff and head of the Situation Center in Ukraine, the German MOD, with Welt am Sonntag, he discusses the long time needed to repair and maintain damaged Ukrainian Leopard 2A6s and Stridsvarm 122s, which are the Swedish version of the Leopard 2A5s, I believe. According to him, the Ukrainians remove many usable components from the MBTs, probably due to lack of spare parts, before they're handed over to the repair hubs in Germany or Lithuania. He is therefore talking about rebuilding the tanks and not repairing or maintaining them, which of course takes a relatively long time. Problem is to be solved by better qualification of Ukrainian soldiers, through a more targeted supply of spare parts and intensive dialogue with the Ukrainians to get the vehicles to the maintenance hubs more quickly. Major General also makes a clear statement on a direction of Russia and Ukraine. The modern Russian armed forces have been de facto destroyed. The well-trained units no longer exist. Entire divisions have been destroyed. Nevertheless, Russia's imperialistic impulse is unbroken. This makes it all the more important for us to help Ukraine to victory. So strong words and support from the German MOD there, and trying to get around this issue of long lead times with regard to repairing German-built tanks that the Ukrainians are using. Now, moving on to drones. This is the DJI Agras T30, agricultural drone in Ukrainian service, except not really doing agricultural work when you see it with a heavy machine gun attached to it. Armed with a PKM 7.62 and 54mm machine gun and a ball spike anti-tank grenade launcher. I mean, goodness me, this is a bit of innovation going on, but there's been a lot of talk about things like ATGNs being fixed to drones, and that would be fantastic. So these much larger, more capable octocopters or similar, actually this is 6, is that hexcopter, being able to have quite serious capabilities on board. Of course, every time the Ukrainians are producing pictures of these, you can imagine that the Russians are likewise looking into that. Peter Clifford here says Ukrainians are now developing a third generation of marine drones as well. So he talks about the experimental drone with a machine gun and ATGM, but also a marine drone here, Ukraine's third generation naval drone, although this is Chuck Farrow. We often need to be careful about what he claims. Long range, high speed, low observable strike platform. This is a very dynamic sector, really, the marine drones. They appear to be like working on them consistently in order to make them more effective, get into the ports, get as far as Novorossiysk and do damage to the Black Sea Fleet over there. Right, returning to... sorry, I didn't really mention. So third generation marine drones with improved navigation systems, sensors, and increased range and bigger warheads. So all of the stuff I was talking about, really. Just to return to the Dragonfire laser, Grant Shapps mentioned this on an interview with Times Radio. It was an interesting interview, actually, pretty good one. But he talked about how, so we know that this, or at least the claims are that this has a range, or it can hit a £1 coin at a distance of 1 kilometre. It's that accurate. And he said it costs a tenner to fire. So when you're talking about the cost of a NASAMS air defense missile, Patriot air defense missile, or even shorter range one like a Stinger, or or the ammunition for a Gepard, proximity fuses, and all these kind of fairly expensive things, even if they're the lower end of the price range with regard to shells for rounds for a Gepard gun, they're not going to match 10 quid. 10 quid to take out a drone with a laser with the accuracy of a £1 coin at 1,000 meters. If they can make this workable, this is phenomenal. Pretty sci-fi, pretty James Bond, but phenomenal. Okay, Kyiv Independent. Guardian reports that the UK has given UN photos of North Korean shipments to Russia. So the UK has given a panel of UN experts satellite photographs of North Korean cargo ships to Russia as evidence in an investigation into illegal arms trading. This is massive, right? I don't know how it can happen, but hopefully we get to a stage where it is very obvious that Russia has broken the UN's resolutions and is therefore pulled out, invalidated from sitting on the United Nations Security Council. And if that happens, then things look very different, right? Why the Russian Federation gets to sit on that? I mean, there's lots to talk about this. W. Bin in my threads is consistently talking about this, how they really don't have the right to sit there anyway, because it used to be the USSR and they just assumed the role, but it's not actually written into any formal documentation as far as I'm aware. There's a very good rationale to suggest that they can actually be fairly easily voted off the United Nations Security Council is not that difficult to put that into motion. Now, you're going to have a lot more justification for that if it can be shown that they are breaking the UN's own, security resolutions and whatnot. So, that could be pretty significant, I think. And then on Russian equipment, a new diamond gyroscope is being tested for Russian drones. It can even work in space. Russian link is not publishable, but inertial navigation system provides centimeter level global positioning together with altitude angles or attitude angles, heading, roll, and pitch, showing the object's 3D orientation. In other words, the Russians are working very much on upscaling their upgrading their drone capabilities here. And there's some talk about exactly what a diamond nuclear spin gyroscope does and how it works. I'll leave you to go and look into that. Suffice to say that the Russians are looking to improve their capabilities. The question is always whether they can produce anything that they design at scale. Okay, moving on to geopolitical stuff now. Ukrainian drones force the shutdown of Novatek's Ust-Luga gas condensate plant, Baltic's key energy hub, Bloomberg reports. I report on this in my last one in the strike section, just to reiterate the importance of this. The Novatek attributes the plant fire to external influence, without giving details. It was hit by Ukrainian drones. How much effect this will have on the Russian ability to generate funding for their war is yet to be seen, but I think it could be fairly significant. And if Ukraine can keep doing things like this in the same way that that Russia hit grain exports, then that will have a significant effect on the Russian ability to make money. Now, difference with grain is that's feeding the world, and this was actually hitting the world supply of grain and destroying it. What does this do? Is this comparable? Like, can you present a case where actually the Ukrainians shouldn't be doing this because this is oil that's set for the world? How do we feel about that? Sanctions and all this are doing pretty much the same, stopping, or at least not stopping the supply, but they're stopping the Russians being able to get so much money. Is this a different thing, stopping the supply? Is this something that Ukrainians should be doing? No matter what the morality or the political morality of this is certainly going to help Ukraine in their efforts to debilitate the Russians in terms of funding their own war efforts. I'll leave you to discuss that. Right. According to new military doctrine, Belarus will consider an attack on its allies as an attack on its territory, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Belarus. Wow. Okay, this could be really significant if it means a kind of Article 5 of NATO equivalency. So, from what I'd understand this, and this is only, unfortunately, with Max 23, doesn't often put the links to what the claims are, and so that's really annoying. I'd love to be able to read the original document here, original source. But it could be that Belarus is saying, right, if you attack Russia, and you could then argue that a strike on that St. Petersburg oil terminal could qualify as a strike on Russia. That means that's a strike on us, says Belarus. And that gives Belarus the permission to commit to the war formally. And although their army is probably not quite what Lukashenko would like it to be, this could be a real issue. And the problem with that is Putin might like that very much, but the Belarusians aren't, from a population level, aren't massive fans of Lukashenko. He's basically become a dictator, and he's only in place due to the assistance in the last elections of Putin. Like, he was installed by Putin. It's a highly controversial election. So committing the army to the war in Ukraine might be deeply, deeply unpopular with the public in Belarus, and so that might not be such a good option for Lukashenko. Right, moving on to American political news. Ron DeSantis has dropped out from the US presidential race. He has endorsed Trump. I mean, it's insane, isn't it, to think that Trump has personally insulted his family in the last election. It's pathetic. In my opinion, it's pathetic. Ron DeSantis gets personally, like, his family gets trashed. It's all horrible. And then he knows how powerful Trump is in the party, that he goes back. He doesn't stand tall with principles. He just goes to Trump with his tail between his legs. Anyway, so he's pulled out and then endorsed Trump. So it's really Nikki Haley against Trump. You might then see this kind of division within the GOP, within the American Republican Party, with maybe a whole bunch of Reagan Republicans going to Nikki Haley. But then, you'd imagine them to already be there. Ron DeSantis' supporters, given what he's like and his positioning on stuff, he's very Trumpian anyway. So most of his supporters are going to go to Trump. And the big question, I've been watching some analysis on this over the last 24 hours. The big question is quite how far Nikki Haley is behind Trump in the New Hampshire polls and the New Hampshire primary. And there's an awful lot that rides on those results. So I guess we'll see. Will she be that far behind that there's no point in continuing? But then, Nikki Haley will be surely also looking at, I can't drop out, because what happens if all these court cases then absolutely hammer Trump, and it is not looking good legally speaking. So even if she's quite far behind, does she stay in order that there's at least someone there in the public eye, in light of maybe either a dwindling support for Trump in light of legal issues, or invalidating him from running in light of certain legal issues and whatnot? So I know there's a lot to analyze in that and see in the coming weeks and months. Now, at the same time, oh my goodness, I'm sorry to dump on him again, but, he's dumping on himself. It's a Trump dump. He's called Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban a great man and a great leader in Europe. Some people don't like him because he's too strong. It is good to have a strong person at the head of a country. What? You could say that's the exact same justification you could use for Stalin, Pol Pot, and Hitler. I mean, it's absolutely freaking naive and pretty terrible. Viktor Orban's not a good leader.
There's a great man.
He's not a great man.
Leader in Europe.
He's not.
Viktor Orban. He's the Prime Minister of Hungary. He's a very great leader, very strong man. Some people don't like him because he's too strong. It's nice to have a strong man running your country, but he...
Oh, I can't tell you how disgusting that is. Some people like him because he's strong. Some people don't like him because he's strong. No, some people don't like him because he's a dictator doing dictatorial things, and he's democratically backsliding his country. It's so naive, this man. Right, at the same time, Robert Fico in Slovakia is saying terrible things that is broadly in line with Viktor Orban and the Putin Kremlin. So in 2014, says Fico, after the Maidan, Ukraine became completely controlled by the United States. Why did the Russian president give the order to use military force in Ukraine? Ukraine is not a sovereign and independent country, I think he means. So in other words, Russia were justified in attacking because it wasn't a sovereign country and it was basically owned by the US. This is Kremlin talking point 101. Now, it gets worse. Ukraine must sacrifice territory to end Russian invasion, according to Slovak PM Robert Fico. Quote, there has to be some kind of compromise. What are they expecting the Russians to do? To withdraw from Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk? This is unrealistic, said the Slovak leader to the state broadcaster RTVS. Gee whiz. And actually, I think he's finding a little bit of kickback to some of his views in Slovakia as well at the moment. Now, at the same time, I'm a big fan of General Ben Hodges, right? And he's on the money. He was wrong with Crimea in terms of the success the Ukrainians would have, in the same way that Zelensky was wrong in calculating the impact of the Russian fortifications and the lack of weapons being given to Ukraine. So he's predicting weapons to be given sooner and more of them, and they weren't. And the fortifications and minefields, we all know the rest. But I've got a lot of time for Ben Hodges. Here, he says the thing that really pushed me over the edge on what Trump has said is when I heard him talking about my generals and my judges as if we are some third world country that the judges and generals all owed their fealty to whoever the dictator was.
The thing that really pushed me over the edge on Mr. Trump was when I heard him talking about my generals and my judges, as if we were some third world country that the judges and generals and other authorities all owed their fealty to whoever the dictator was. And I just can't imagine that the founding fathers intended that, the president would have this kind of personal control over generals. But that's obviously how Mr. Trump thinks, and it's reprehensible.
And he talks a lot here about he's in defense of Mark Milley a lot because Trump has absolutely been hammering away at Mark Milley and saying he's lazy and this and that and doesn't know his stuff. And he's like, he's the hardest working guy and is the most well-read person, not just in the military, but in the United States. He's like, General Ben Hodges is really sticking up for him. And he says, look, our oath is to the Constitution. Anyway, if you want to see that interview, it's on Midas Touch. It's an avowedly left-wing network, but I enjoy it myself. He absolutely, as it says here, drops a hammer on Trump. So if you want to see a military opinion, a general's opinion on who could be the next president, then go and check that out. It is well worth watching. Right, moving on. Prime Minister of Poland Donald Tusk has arrived in Kiev. Office of the Prime Minister of Poland has said it's reported that it's his first visit to Ukraine after being appointed to the post. It is noted that he plans to discuss a problem of Poland's embargo on the imports of Ukrainian agricultural products and the blocking of the border by Polish carriers. Now, if you want to see, I know I'm having arguments with WBin at the moment on my threads with regard to Donald Tusk and PIS, the previous government, and the present government are trying to move Poland back in a more democratic way, trying to make the judiciary more independent. I'm having arguments with this person. If you wanted to see a quick summary of the political situation in Poland at the moment with regard to PIS, the judiciary, and the state television broadcaster, check out Why Poland's Political Crisis is Hotting Up from TLDR News EU. TLDR News is always a useful kind of oversight of things going around the world, and they have an EU one as well to do with stuff going on in the EU. So go and look at TLDR News EU, Why Poland's Political Crisis is Hotting Up. It's just 9 minutes, nice, quick, gives you a nice overview, really useful. Right. Ben Hodges again. Hopefully, concerned Americans will hold similar peaceful demonstrations against right-wing extremism. So he's really having to go at the moment about this kind of movement in the US before the elections in November. I want to know, the reason I'm showing you this, I want to know from Germans watching what the background is here, what's going on. So in Hamburg, Germany, tens of thousands of protests against the far right today. So you've got the AfD rising. Why this is important to Ukraine is because the AfD are much more aligned to the Kremlin, and if they are rising in popularity across Russia, across Germany, particularly in Eastern Germany, then this will be a threat to a unity of support for Ukraine. So I would like to know what the lay of the land is in Germany from people in Germany. So in Hamburg, Germany, tens of thousands are protesting. The rally had to be cut short due to safety concerns because of the size of the crowd. The wave of protests against the far right will continue on the weekend with dozens of rallies. So I just wanted to know, what was going on. I mean, look at that all around. That's absolutely incredible numbers by the looks of it. Try and give us some greater context of what's going on. Right, Alexander Stahel saying here that insurance brokers Marsh say rates have risen as much as 70-fold since early December. The premium to insure a $100 million container ship has jumped from $10,000 to about $700,000. 70-fold increase for a Red Sea shipping insurance. This isn't so much to do with Ukraine, but we can connect Iran, Houthis to Ukraine and to Russia in some ways. But just to let you know that this stuff is going on in the Red Sea still. It's an issue, and like I said to you before, the Houthis might be striking the ships because of the Israel-Palestine war, or conflict, the Americans and British and others who have struck the Houthis are not doing that because of that conflict. They are doing that because of economics. I was having this discussion yesterday because that's how cool I am at this social event I went to yesterday afternoon, where it was like, you've got to understand that this is that our armed forces are acting predominantly on behalf of our national interests, which are economic interests invariably. And of course, that's not critical. That is, that's in our national interest because that makes us more prosperous, brings in tax dollars, and they pay for our welfare systems, our education, so on and so forth. So this is all connected. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Our nations go and get involved, and that's the same with Ukraine. Every dollar that is being spent by any country on supporting Ukraine is for the benefit of the country given that dollar. There is no charity involved here, unless it's like strictly humanitarian charity and a separate thing. But from state points of view, like the $61 billion that the US has got stuck in Congress isn't just about like frittering away money and taking money out of the US and throwing it at Ukraine. It's spending money predominantly in the US to support Ukraine for the benefit of the US. But it's also the moral thing to do. And that's the great thing about this, is that we can talk about ideas of geopolitical benefit. We can talk of economic, financial benefit. We can talk about all of these ways that countries supporting Ukraine will benefit from that assistance. It's also clearly the right moral thing to do. These two things align. Right, I just want to pop in to talk about hydrocarbons and the US. So I talked about the US now pumping more oil than they ever have done, right? And saying that in December, the figures are coming out that the quarter would be the most oil pumped in not just US history, but the history of any country in the world. And I just want to go to John Boy here. So thank you. He's a long-term supporter of the channel. I really appreciate his viewership. He's the completely other end of the spectrum to me. He just said Biden has not increased oil production. He's still refusing to do so. What he is doing is emptying the strategic petroleum reserve. I just want to call this out because it is basically incorrect, and I want accuracy to prevail here. And if I say something and someone challenges it, I need to defend what I say. So the idea, and it doesn't show all the comments here, but the idea that he's saying is that this extra isn't production, it's coming from strategic reserves. And in fact, he should have just it's all about the Keystone pipeline, oil pipeline. They're not giving enough permission there's not enough permission for people to start drilling more and more, and that's why Trump says drill baby drill. The reality is you don't need to give permission to drill in more places, because you can extract more oil from where you are already extracting it. Okay, and increased technology has meant you can do that. And so he is able to facilitate the US pumping more oil and gas, right? And that is what's happening. This is not drawing from strategic reserves. They did that in 2022. It's not what's taking place now. So I just want to justify this with, facts. It's so easy to make up our own narratives here. And I'm fighting for truth and accuracy to prevail. Don't just assert things and then say this is the truth, because actually it's not the truth. So let's first look at strategic reserves. So how long will the US oil reserves last? And this is a useful article from How Stuff Works, science.howstuffworks, that talks about strategic reserves here. So one of the most recent drawdowns, so this is when instead of pumping more out of the ground, you're taking it from like big strategic reserves that sit in the US in case of emergency. So one of the most recent ones was October the 19th, 2022, when President Joe Biden announced 15 million barrels from these strategic reserves would be put on the crude market to be delivered in December. This drawdown completes this historic $180 million drawdown announced by Biden administration in March 2022. So in March, they announced we are going to flood the markets with a load of strategic reserves of oil because of what's going on in Ukraine. That was a direct reaction to the war in Ukraine in March, and that continued, and then they released some more in October, and that then finished in December. That's when your drawdown from as far as I understand it, from the strategic reserves kind of finished in a major way. Quote, the world is The March 31st announcement was the largest release of oil from the strategic reserves in US history. The drawdown placed 1 million barrels on the crude market daily, every day for 6 months. But then not now. The world has never had a release of oil reserves at this 1 million per day rate for this length of time. According to the statement from the White House, this record release will provide a historic amount of supply to serve as a bridge until the end of the year when domestic production ramps up. So the end of the year, domestic production ramps up to then mitigate the need to take from strategic reserves, right? So that's what happened. They drew from strategic reserves so that they could get onto the market straight away, because it takes time to ramp up. Then you ramp up production, and then you're not needing to draw from strategic reserves, and then you can ramp up production enough that you're then backfilling the strategic reserves. So let's look at that evidence. The US Department of Energy coordinated with international allies and partners to release additional oil from their strategic reserves as well. Before that, on March 2nd, 2022, the US Department of Energy announced another sale of 30 million barrels of crude. That drawdown was also coordinated with member countries of the IEA to address supply disruptions related to the war. Okay. Then, now, the US, and this is from November 2023, so this is the last few months, the US plans to buy 1.2 million barrels of oil for strategic petroleum reserve. In other words, they are backfilling that reserve now with 1.2 million barrels. The US plans to buy those barrels to help replenish the strategic petroleum reserve after it sold off the largest amount ever last year, so 2022. So what John, and I'm sorry, John, mate, but you're wrong here. They are not doing that now. So when I said they are pumping the most oil now, I referred explicitly in that article to Q4 2023. And the strategic reserves were drawn in 2022, not in 2023, right? So, and this article again confirms this. After it sold off the largest amount ever last year, the Energy Department said on Monday, and it talks in detail about that and how the US are now, outproducing, Saudi Arabia, etc. Okay, then when we go to here, the Oil and Gas Journal, the US heads into 2024. So this is Q4 2023, producing, not drawing from reserves, producing more oil than any country in history. Fourth quarter 2023, US total liquids production stands at 24.1 billion barrels per day, of which 13.3 billion barrels per day is crude and condensate, with the balance composed of natural gas, liquids and biofuels. Both totals are global records. In other words, the crude oil there, not the refined that you could say some of that might come from reserves and then you're refining it up. This is, the crude is being produced at record levels. At the same time, both Brazil and Canada are poised to achieve their highest production levels in history. All three nations are on track to establish new national highs again in 2024. Quote, not only is US producing more oil than any other country in history, but the amount of oil, crude oil, refined products and natural gas products that it is exporting is near the total production in Saudi Arabia or Russia. When you look back on 2008, when US production was at a 62-year low and exports were zero, it is a remarkable turnaround, says someone involved in this. I'm not a big fan of this from an environmental point of view, but let's at least be accurate in what's being claimed. Here is a PBS interview with some experts, and I just reading through the transcript of how the US oil production reached an all-time high in 2023. And again, this is the data and the stats. It's taken away my highlighting there. It's really frustrating. So anyway, here's part of it. Really, the story begins around 15 years ago with fracking. Right there, suddenly the United States became a production powerhouse, and it's had its ups and downs. But in the last year or so, there's been almost an unprecedented increase in production, actually the most since 2014. So at this point, US, as you mentioned, is producing about 13.5 million barrels a day, and we're heading towards 14 million barrels a day. That is more oil than any other country in the world. That is a record for the US, and it may well be the record for any country in the world. And then, so the question was, and is this a function of companies ramping up production? Is it as simple as that? No, it isn't. Actually, it's very interesting. The very large companies, the Exxons and Chevrons, have actually tried to be very disciplined. They don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, where they would pump a lot of oil when prices were high, only to see prices collapse. And of course, that's what they don't want to see. So while they've been disciplined, the smaller companies financed by private capital mostly, they are basically pressing on the gas, so to speak. And we're producing more oil from these small producers, and this looks like it will continue. Actually, what has happened was with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when the price of the commodities, of all the commodities, but especially oil and gas went up, these companies got a signal from the market to start pumping more. And that's exactly what they have done. So they are pumping more oil, and it's actually coming from the smaller and medium-sized concerns and not the massive ones. Here we've got CNN Business, again talking about the record production per day, according to U.S. Energy Information Administration. That's just above the Donald Trump era record of 13.1 million barrels set in 2020, just before COVID sent output and prices crashing. And that's been helping to keep a lid on crude and gasoline prices. US output led by shale oil drillers in Texas and New Mexico's Permian Basin. So this is not strategic reserves. It is led by oil drillers. Is so strong that it's sending supplies overseas. So they're now producing so much they are exporting, which is something they hadn't been doing so much previously. America is exporting the same amount of crude oil, refined products, and natural gas liquids as Saudi Arabia and Russia produces. So they're exporting the same amount that they produce. So they're not only using all their stuff themselves, the US, but exporting stuff equivalent to Saudi or Russia. So phenomenal. And then Atlantic, why is the US pumping more oil than any other country in history? And again, Biden administration began using every tool at its disposal to bring prices under control, most of which involved increasing supply. It released, so this is what it did in 2022, it released 180 million barrels from the nation's strategic petroleum reserve, eased sanctions enforcement against Venezuela and Iran, and pressured domestic companies to boost production. That autumn, the administration announced measures to encourage immediate investment by promising to buy oil from private producers if the price were to fall below a certain level, which is what they're doing now to replenish strategic reserves. Although the president's control over gas prices is limited, these ongoing actions appear to have made an impact. A Treasury Department analysis credited the Strategic Petroleum Reserve release alone, so in 2022, with the shaving of 40 cents off the gallon. But of course, Biden didn't get the plaudits for that from Republicans, so they don't like to say thanks for actually doing something that's beneficial to curbing inflation. And some experts believe that the impact was even greater. President Biden is committed to doing everything in his power to respond to Putin's price hike at the pump, and he is delivering, said a White House statement in 2022. So that was a strategic release in 2022. They're pumping more now, and they were pumping more. They were ramping up then. They're now pumping more now, and they're exporting more than ever, and they are refilling their reserves that they use. So hopefully that's all the information you need. Please, John, with all due respect, and thank you for putting your views across, but let's try and be accurate, and hopefully this puts that point to bed. Anyway, thanks, take care, speak soon.